up, everybody? Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Burn It Down with Kim Brown, the safe space where we set oppression ablaze and we know and believe and will work to make sure that something better arises from the ashes. I like to say hello to all y'all's very specific smiling faces up in the place, and so excited that everybody's here to join us. Hey guys, couple things. We got a little bit of housekeeping to talk about. Couple things. So first of all, Molly has let me know that we are only 3 patrons short of meeting our April goal. So if you like what you see here on Burn It Down with Kim Brown, consider becoming a patron. You can do so at patreon.com/BIDWKB. We have some lovely cheers available for you. You can get in on the low for just $2 a month. And y'all, we have some very generous patrons. Shout out to Susan I. Where are you, honey? Thank you, Susan, for your very generous patronage donation. We appreciate that. What's up? Where's Courtney the SLP? Courtney the SLP cashed us $20 on Friday. Thank you, Courtney the SLP. Pimp C. What's up, Pimp C? We appreciate all the love and support, guys. So, hey, y'all know how I feel about the situation. If y'all just show up and like and share, maybe talk shit to a troll or two if you have time. Only if you have time. That absolutely works for me too. And you can always follow us on the Twitters at Burn It Down with KB, or even better, go on Facebook. Facebook is where all the trolls live, apparently, because they have turned our Facebook comments into utter shit. So we appreciate any kind of support. If it's a like, if it's some bread, all is welcome. All love and support is welcome here, guys. So we have one more thing. Sorry, one more housekeeping thing. So as y'all, I'm sure know that our past couple of weeks worth of videos, just the comment section just turned into Klan rallies. I mean, they were just openly burning crosses in our comments under some of our videos. So what I did this weekend, guys, I went through all the comments, most of the bullshit comments, and took all them shits down. So I probably deleted every bit of like 400 comments. That motherfucker, have y'all ever heard of some conservative media piece of shit named Mark Dice, D-I-C-E? Big troll. He had a top comment under our video. I said, no, sir, not over here. So I got rid of all that shit. So some things I did keep up, because I did see where some of you got into some very interesting back and forth threads with some trolls. So I left them joints up because, the motherfuckers can't box with us. Facts and history are not things that these people rely on to make their argument. So some of them joints I found entertaining, so I kept some of those up. But do me a favor, if you see any bullshit under any comments, flag them joints, report them joints, get them niggas out of here, y'all, because number one, these same people gonna cry about censorship. Oh, she can't take the heat. She's censoring our comments. Mind you, these was the same motherfuckers reporting my channel to YouTube for terrorism. So don't talk to me about censorship, asshole, because y'all motherfuckers was trying to do way more than censor me. You was trying to get my channel snatched and trying to send feds to my house. So fuck you and fuck you again. So guys, that's our housekeeping. Let's get that out the way. Again, I'm so happy to see all y'all smiling faces up in the place. What's up, Courtney the SLP? What's up, Black Magic? What's up, Nick? Who else up in here? Everybody. Schultz 100. Who else up in here? Everybody. My whole crew is up in here. That's what I like to see. And guys, if you saw the title of today's show, okay, because we're going to have a little bit of chuckle, but a serious chuckle, because the concept of police investigating themselves for wrongdoing and misconduct is all laughable, right? I remember maybe about 10 or so years ago, I actually did a story about the FBI, how the FBI, I want to say this is 2012 or 2013, found themselves faultless in over 150 shootings, right? The FBI shot people, killed some people, investigated themselves, and said no wrongdoing has been happening here. So it's interesting, all of this talk about reform. It's almost like, we're leaving the wolves to sort of reform themselves. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense. And the issue of police reform is sort of like it's a misnomer. Like you can't even, it's like trickle down economics. It's some shit that doesn't exist, but that powerful people in positions sort of made up as a catchy phrase, right? Police reform. Yes, that's something that we totally can do because the system is broken. Well, that's starting from the wrong position of framing the argument, because number one, the system is not broken. The system is working exactly how it's supposed to work. The system is here to ensnare Black and brown people in the prison industrial complex. And this is done by policing. And how police do this is they routinely violate people's civil rights, their constitutional rights, and they try to throw bullshit charges on people to ruin their lives. And a lot of these arrests are statistics driven, and the police know good and goddamn well that they are out here violating our constitutional and civil rights. There was a piece recently published in the appeal.org today. Can we get that pulled up, please? The name of the piece is called "Let Me See Your Waistband." And it details one of the police departments that we have just coincidentally talked about quite a bit here on Burn It Down with Kim Brown, and that's DC's Metropolitan Police Department. And in this piece, it details how MPD's gun recovery unit is a statistics-driven business, and how the cops routinely terrorize citizens, they terrorize neighborhoods, and they make up shit to plant shit on people to get them in jail. Well, today, guys, we're joined with the author of that piece. Brandon Soderberg wrote this and a number of other investigative journalistic pieces talking about police corruption, not just in Baltimore, but in other places as well. He is also the co-author of the book titled "I Got a Monster." This is about the rise and fall of America's most corrupt police squad, the Gun Task Trace Force in Baltimore City. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. But you guys, welcome Brandon Soderberg to the show. Brandon, I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you so much for making some time to enlighten us about your work and talk to us about really how far down the rabbit hole police corruption actually does go. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, in reading the piece that you just wrote for the appeal, "Let Me See Your Waistband," I want you to kind of take us through it, because there was several things that jumped out at me about your piece. But one of your sources happens to be a veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department of over 30 years. And this person gave a statement or wrote a letter and did so anonymously with the assumption that you would keep their name out of the piece for fear of retaliation, which makes total sense. But this person goes into detail about how the war on guns, much like the war on drugs, is just another reason to stop and frisk, to make up probable cause, and basically fuck with brown and Black people.
Yeah. So where do I start here?
Where do you start?
May to begin. Yeah. So last year I wrote a book on, excuse me. Okay.
Smoking too much weed. Smoking too much weed, yeah. Brandon.
That's me. All right. Good. Let's go. So earlier this year, a former member of the Metropolitan Police Department approached me about writing about what they had seen and experienced in the department. To sort of get the contours of that clear, they provided me with a letter. We also spoke at length. So in terms of any concerns about the validity of this, I just want to stress that this has been vetted thoroughly. What they mostly describe are actually things that a lot of people in the community have been saying for a long time, as is often the case with reporting. Guys like me are late to the story, but no one else is doing the work yet. So, and what I found compelling about this was that you have a police officer repeating the same exact concerns of the residents. So at the core of this, I think, is this idea of gun units, which my book from last year, I Got a Monster, is also about gun units. These units are sort of tasked with this idea that you need to get guns off the street by any means necessary. This is primarily its own kind of reform, because it's a reform against drug cops and drug busts, which slowly but surely we're getting away from. The racist war on drugs continues for sure, but at the core of it, increasingly people understand that people who use drugs generally don't need to be arrested. Therefore, police have sort of created this reform, this sort of cuddly reform where we don't go after drugs, we go after guns. The reality of this in places like DC and Baltimore and many other cities is that the very same people that were previously being jacked up for drugs are now being jacked up for guns. And the same kind of really questionable and at their core Fourth Amendment violation tactics are happening. The gun unit in DC, I think, is exceptional for a few reasons. The first is that paradoxically, because DC has incredibly strict gun laws, that gives police even more leeway to challenge people and question people and search them for guns. It's kind of a paradox, right? You create gun laws because you believe that people will carry less guns the stricter the laws are. But in fact, in DC, they're using the strictest of the laws to assume everyone's having a gun and justifying getting in their pocket or in their car or in their house and finding a gun. And then the really kind of nefarious stuff that happens with the gun unit is basically a mix of consent searches and jump outs. I think we all kind of know what jump outs are, but basically they identify someone, generally a black man, as being in a high crime neighborhood. That's the first step towards suspecting they have a gun. It's pretty flimsy. The next step is they approach this person, either walking up to them or speeding their car up and jumping out. The gun unit is generally an unmarked car with like a vest on, not like a police uniform. So that's also can be really scary. If anyone's ever experienced a jump out, it's really frightening because it's not even clear it's police, let alone the fact that police are scary. They then do things like locate all these kind of reasons why your behavior is suspicious. And they kind of do this in a really clinical way that my source and the story articulates, where they find reasons like walking too fast is a reason that you might be carrying a gun. Walking too slow is a reason why you might be carrying a gun. Having a backpack is a reason why you might be carrying a gun. Then when they approach you, they use these techniques that they're kind of taught are like signals of possession of a firearm. Like one is this thing that I'm kind of obsessed with now called blading. And blading is just going like this. You know, put your shoulder blade up. Especially if a cop's kind of jumping out on you, you might naturally go like this. Then blading is like the suspect is, and then you immediately become a suspect, of course. And so the suspect is, you know, blading, and they're showing it's indication they're trying to protect themselves that they have a gun. I mean, this is bogus. They then ask you flat out, do you have a gun on you? If they ask you a question, you're not required to answer it. This isn't like license and registration, please. This is, do you have a gun? But of course, if a cop or four cops, all with guns on their sides and tactical vests on, ask you a question, you kind of can't really say you're going to answer it. You kind of have to answer. You can't really say, I'm not going to answer that, officer. It just doesn't work. We can all talk about what rights we have, but it just doesn't manifest that way. Then if you say, no, officer, I don't have a gun, they'll do things like saying, well, the way he asked that was suspicious, or his eyes were, he was making furtive gestures and we felt like he was lying, and then they search you illegally. And then sometimes they obtain a gun. Very rarely. It's a lot of data that shows this is really unsuccessful. But that's sort of the movement. And so it's really nefarious because it's based in creating a series of versions of probable cause that then get you to the point where you can say, here, we searched this person, they had a gun, that's why. And of course, if you're walking down the street and had this happens to you and you don't get arrested because you didn't have a gun, you probably just don't worry about it. It's really traumatizing experiences. But like, people understand, you just don't, it's not worth calling the police about this stuff. So that's kind of the big center of it, I think, because what you see there is the way that they're using contriving probable cause and using these kind of bogus reasons to arrest people to arrest them. And then what my source, this veteran of almost 30 years, command level, so pretty authoritative, kind of also describes is just the smaller ways that the way they pressure you for a gun, which relates to what you said, Kim, about being statistics driven. So it becomes a thing of like, they'll stop someone in DC who doesn't have a gun. Let's say they stop someone and he has drugs on him. And they'll say, hey, if you want that drug charge to go away, point us towards someone who has a gun. And then I've seen this in Baltimore too. So then people start to either flip on someone or sometimes even just point someone in the direction of a gun. I mean, in cities like Baltimore, sometimes you might be able to be like, hey, I know where there's a gun, and the cops get it. What they do in DC that's even crazier is they create a list of all these guns, and there's pictures of them and descriptions of where they are. So it's pretty public. If you go through those lists, you'll see that sometimes the officers will identify having located a gun, but there's no person attached to the gun. I've asked the department to explain this. They never do. It's because what they're doing is they're getting people to flip and just get them guns by any means necessary. Hey, I know there's a gun hidden in this trash can or under this radiator. Also, if you follow anything on Twitter with police, you've seen police posting pictures of guns, and sometimes you'll see them posting like a really rusty gun that looks like it's about 100 years old. Those are the results of those kinds of things. So I stress that this is all kind of within the contours of like Fourth Amendment violations, but it's happening daily in DC, and it's terrorizing residents. And it's also, this is sort of secondary, in my opinion, to the Fourth Amendment violations, but it's also not at all effective. So even the argument, this is a useful way to do it. Like most people being stopped are not being found with weapons. So it's illegal and it's unproductive, which is kind of the story of American policing right now, I think.
So Brandon, I mean, everything you just laid out is so layered. And then there are several things that I want us to circle back and get back to, because in your piece for theappeal.org, the article leads off detailing the case of a young man in his early 20s who was walking through DC, and he was carrying a backpack, and police stopped and frisked him, seemingly with no probable cause. And as you mentioned, the reason that police said that they stopped him is because he adjusted his backpack. Okay. They asked him, did he have a gun? He repeatedly told them no. And he admitted to them to having marijuana, but marijuana is legal in Washington, D.C., so no big deal, right? They couldn't pop him on the weed. So they search him and they claim that he has a gun. And when there is negotiations between his defense team and the prosecutor, once the young man said, I'm not taking this deal for this bullshit, 15 minutes later, Brandon, the prosecutors dropped the charges. That just goes to show, I guess, that's one example of how flimsy some of these searches are, and even some of these prosecutions. And it just made me horrified to think about the people who may have accepted a plea deal and who now may be incarcerated behind some shit that either they didn't do or the police did not have a legal probable cause to stop and search them for.
Yeah, I mean, the gamble in most American cities, but it seems to be especially strong in DC and Baltimore as well, because I can speak for it, is the assumption that people will plead out rather than go to trial, especially with gun charges. There's kind of these two different sides of it. The one side of it is generally, in theory, a gun charge should be really easy to prove in court. The officer says that they seized a gun. The officer stands there and say, the prosecutor's like, is that the gun you seized? Officer blah, blah, blah. Officer blah, blah, blah says, yes, sir, that was the gun. And then it's kind of over. You know, he said he had a gun. But what they're doing in DC, especially, I think they're doing this in every city, and I know they're doing it in Baltimore, is they, kind of approach it as like contriving by making the stop illegal. It actually creates this gray area where if you really wanted to, you could try to fight back. Now, Mr. Crudup in my story, who you mentioned, decided to not plead out. And that's because he was sort of very confident in his rights and been advised by his lawyer. Most people aren't that confident. Most people understand that like having a gun is just automatically seen as bad, especially if you're going to like a jury trial or something. Like, we've just trained people to understand that if Black men are possessing guns, they are criminal. I mean, sort of the big absurdity of this, and one of the lawyers involved with his case kind of pointed this out, was, certainly the gun recovery unit wasn't trolling around DC on January 6th looking for guys in cargo hats and, hunting rifles and, MAGA hats on and all that kind of stuff. They weren't going after those people and saying, these are the symptoms, these are the sort of details that would suggest someone has a gun. So there's this massive contradiction between how we police Black men with guns and white men with guns. But in particular, though, the prosecution gambles on the fact that most people would plead out rather than face going to trial for a gun, because in the case of the example at the beginning of the story, he did have a gun, but he stressed multiple times, no, you cannot search me. And they had no justification for searching him. And that's something that I think reporters, prosecutors, everyone needs to get their head around, is that we can't have this system where if the police get you with something that you're not supposed to have, but they do it illegally, it doesn't matter. You should still get charged for it. So in this case, yeah, he said, no, I'm not pleading out to this. And they dropped it. That's rare. Most people plead out. And a lot of times they'll fight it and punish you. And then you're looking at, maybe a mandatory minimum or something like that in jail. So this way that gun possession and this sort of demarcation between illegal guns, which means you have some kind of felony or something on your record that allows you not have a gun, and the sort of way that we police guns in white communities is drastically different. And I hope the story kind of challenges that. And I hope it's a challenge to a lot of people, liberals and even some on the left, that are hesitant about the Second Amendment and taking it seriously, or associated exclusively with the racist death cult that is the NRA. But also, we need to kind of I think what I've been really excited by a little bit with the story is that it's a rare example where people somewhat on the right, or at least libertarians, tend to also find this kind of behavior by police really outrageous. Because at the core of this is exactly what every right-wing maniac is yelling about, which is jackbooted thugs coming into your car, coming into your pockets, kicking in your door and taking your guns. Now the guys, these white dudes like talk a good game about this, but they don't ever experience this. But it's happening every day to black men in DC and Baltimore and a lot of other cities.
And not only do these conservative pro-gun people never experience this, but they are quite okay with black people experience this as part of daily life in America, if you are black or brown. And Brandon, you mentioned something a bit earlier in the conversation that I'm so appreciative that you seized upon, is the fact that these police departments use these gun seizures as a form of PR. Like, look at us. We took a gun off the street. Only 359 million other guns remaining on the street. And it's always struck me as kind of so dumb. Like, why are y'all tweeting a picture of a gun one at a time, as if you are making a dent in the amount of guns that are actually on the street? So really, you're doing a pointless job, because you can never get all the illegal guns off the street. But in the piece that you wrote for the Appeal, the source that you spoke with, the 30+ year veteran of Metropolitan Police Department, talked about statistics-driven policing. And I want you to please tell us, Brandon, why statistics-driven policing is fucked up.
What it does is it kind of mistakes the signal for the noise in a way. And there's a lot of, I learned, to be clear, I learned a lot about understanding this stuff in the way I do because of speaking to some police officers who've kind of seen this as just like bad and like really toxic. I mean, at the core of it is just this idea that police is operating as this PR arm, and that they understand that if you show guns, it makes you feel safe. And April Goggins of Black Lives Matter DC kind of said this when she spoke to me for the story, which is, she was like, it used to be about drugs, now it's about guns. It used to be the thing where the cops would have a big news presser and they'd show all the kilos of blow they seized and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really work anymore, because I think a lot of us are getting increasingly more sophisticated by realizing like people who use drugs and even people who sell drugs are not inherently criminal or shouldn't be considered that way. So we've pivoted to guns, and people still kind of feel like they're safer. But as you said, I mean, a police officer told me that at least in Maryland, you're getting at least something like 30,000 to 40,000 guns are coming through the state every year. So if you're seizing even a few guns a day, even the DC gun recovery unit is seizing around 40 or 50 a week, it seems. It's just not making a dent. And then it's exactly the same as drugs, right? Because we know that every kilo that's seized, there's 100 times that many coming in, et cetera, et cetera. It's sort of this Sisyphean thing, but it's really effective PR. And then these statistics are kind of what mayors, police commissioners, city council members sort of get to pin themselves to and say, hey, we're making a dent in crime. It's like tangible and actionable, even though it's not having an effect. And I mean, one just kind of interesting piece of data is the gun recovery unit was established in 2007, in part because the claim was that the homicide rate was rising in DC. It's at the exact same place almost that it was in 2007 in 2020. So you can show right there that the claim that seizing guns has an effect on crime and especially homicides is not true. But yeah, this statistics game is really dominating policing right now. And the source, the veteran in my story, really discusses that, how these metrics are used to how we determine promotions, how they determine promotions in the department, who gets to go higher, who gets to get more responsibility, who gets to have their own unit. But it has almost no effect on actual public safety. But it's this very specific metric that police departments love to use because it's still very convincing to a lot of people to say, well, in 2019 or whatever, the DC police seized 600 and whatever amount of guns. It seems like a lot, but it's really not, in the same way that seizing even a bunch of kilos is not going to affect the sort of gun and drug economy. The last thing I'd say is I think the one thing I really want to carve out is where it's a little different, or why I think it's less of a Second Amendment issue exactly, is I really want to stress that what I have come to believe from doing this story and writing a book about gun cops is that we need to extract violent crimes and gun possession entirely. They need to be seen as very different things. And too often commissioners like to conflate the two as if possession is the same as using that weapon. And that's another thing, because what your sort of 2A right winger guys will say is like, oh, well, these people possess these guns illegally, and that's not the same as me and my, home in the Midwest with all my guns. It's like, we really need to decouple violent crime from possession. And I want to talk to more people before I say this as an opinion exactly, but I really think we need to investigate the idea of decriminalizing gun possession, that gun possession should just not be a criminal act anymore. So it would prevent police from being able to do this, which is just like jack up young black men all day who have guns for a number of reasons, including their own safety. We'd really be able to eliminate that. I think that would be a really useful way to sort of get beyond this discussion that seizing guns means anything.
That's an interesting point that you raised, Brandon. And what you just brought to my mind were and are the states. And unfortunately, I can't call them off the top of my head. Something is telling me Indiana, something else is telling me Tennessee, but states that have proposed allowing their residents to carry guns without permits, right? You can just carry a gun, which, to a lot of people perhaps sounds pretty scary, but that perhaps is that sort of the decriminalizing of gun possession that you're talking about, just allowing people who are of age to just simply carry without having to register the gun or do anything like that?
I think that certainly it would be better if people were registering their guns and had a license. But we've created this crazy system where the racist drug war puts people in jail that then prevents them from possessing guns. They then live in communities that are incredibly violent because policing doesn't work, and because policing, including gun units, creates more violence in these communities. I mean, my book really explores this way more deeply, where cops are literally creating and committing crime. So you have this thing where there's all these reasons why young black men want and need to possess a gun, but aren't allowed because they have a felony here and there. And we should just sort of decouple that from, it should be the same as, like, in theory, what we're moving towards with like cannabis even, and I hopefully we'll get there with the rest of the drugs, but at least with cannabis, we're increasingly pushing against even the idea that possession or the smell of cannabis is a reason to search you. Virginia, for example, has made this illegal. A cop cannot say, Mr. Soderberg drove by in his car and I could smell cannabis, so I stopped him. I know, look, when I arrested him, I found these other things in his car. If we just if we decriminalize it and remove the ability for cops to use the justification of searching you for guns or whatever else, it would really reduce these sort of police interactions, which are dangerous and unnecessary. And it might move us towards a better understanding of how guns and gun violence works. And it might also move us to understand that, like, sending cops out around black neighborhoods all day, every day to jack people up and search them for guns and finding any reason, turning your shoulder, having a backpack, looking over your shoulder at a police car driving towards you. Those are all reasons they use to search you. Like, in that sense, it's the same as what you see in something like some of these most recent police killings where the reason is he had an air freshener and that's illegal. Like police are they will find any reason to get in your car. If we create less reasons that are allowed to do that, that we can at least maybe begin to reduce these police interactions. And I think while it's extreme, I think we need to start flirting with this idea that policing guns the way we have is really a bad idea as well.
When you talk about these units, the gun recovery unit in DC, the gun trace task force in Baltimore, I mean, these are positions that, you know, young police aspire to have. These are promotions. These are, you know, specific units that have, I guess, some sort of, you know, prestige within their departments. But what I'm reading from your reporting is that these cops are basically being trained to disregard the Constitution, people's constitutional rights. You know, you mentioned the Fourth Amendment right against illegal search and seizure. But these are things that are routinely disregarded by police. They don't seem to have either a knowledge or understanding or even care about the rights of the Constitution and civil rights. But but when we hear about the issue of police reform, all we hear is, oh, they need more training. They need more training. Well, why aren't, or let me back that up, because I know they're getting trained on constitutional and civil rights in the academy, but either they're being you know, shaped to disregard that training. I mean, what can you help me put this together, Brandon? Because these are officers who have either been on the force for years now and have undergone lots and lots of hours of paid training, and yet this is how they conduct themselves, and it is, I would imagine, at the blessing of their superiors. The cops know that their officers are out here disregarding people's rights, and that's accepted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that I've kind of learned actually is that I think a lot of police are way more poorly trained on basic constitutional rights than you'd think. I don't think that means the solution is to train them more, because if they cared, they would learn. But I do think at its core, there is this lack of knowledge about it. It's also seen as, you know, the sergeant of the gun trace task force, the Baltimore gun unit that was federally indicted that I wrote my book about, the sergeant of that was told by commanders, according to him, don't let probable cause get in the way of a good arrest. So that's sort of what command is telling you. And I think that's really common. And then what you also, I know you can say with the DC gun unit is that they're taught things like, we see the Constitution as a protector of people's rights. And I'm going to mangle this quote a little bit, but there was a gun recovery unit training in like 2011 where they said, you need to see the Constitution as a spear. And so what you do is, rather than use it as a way to protect people, you just find every way around it. That's how you get into these things like furtive gestures, and you looked behind him, he switched his shoulders, a backpack. You sort of use anything you can then contrive a probable cause to get to someone. And so at the core of it, I think police see people's rights and probable cause as an impediment to arresting people. And they believe that arresting people is how you reduce crime. And I think there's a lot of evidence that shows that's not how you reduce crime in the long term. I mean, one example would be that in Baltimore, from about 2000 to about 2007, we were arresting in Baltimore an outrageous amount of people in a city of a little over 600,000. City was making about 100,000 arrests, which is just like staggering. And the way you do those arrests is by finding all kind open container, jaywalking, like anything to arrest people and get them in jail. And the idea was, it's kind of this broken window, zero tolerance fusion that's really toxic. We now are moving this to sort of more violent crimes. But I mean, it's at the core of the training won't work because police will find ways around it. I mean, if we have people being stopped for air fresheners and failing to signal that they're turning and things like that, police will find a reason, and they're taught that. So I don't think training and I don't think reform is really going to work. And again, I just stress that like switching to sort of gun arrests was a reform after people finally started to be like, look, arresting people for drugs is a waste of time and isn't helping. They moved it to guns. These are already reforms in place. and officers just find ways around it. That's what they do. That's what they're told to do. And that's what most of us expect them to do. I mean, it's the cliche of movies, right? Like 70s and 80s cop movies where there's some liberal nerd who says, you got to respect the Constitution. They roll their eyes like, hey, we're never going to beat all these criminals if we have to respect the Constitution. And even like federal consent decrees, cops hate them, and they hate them because they say things like, it makes it harder for us to police, as if that's not the point.
Oh, let us get into the discussion about federal consent decrees, because I mean, I think that they are just as effective as the Charmin that is probably hanging in your bathroom right now, just waiting to see your anus when the time is right. Because the Attorney General for the Department of Justice for the Biden administration, Merrick Garland, announced yesterday, was it, that the Department of Justice plans to investigate the Louisville Police Department. This in reaction to the horrible murder of Breonna Taylor, in which no police officers were held accountable. But for Louisville's police department's long reputation of bad practices, of targeting Black residents, of targeting protesters, people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. And Tunde, if we could please take a look at B1. Let's hear what AG Garland had to say in his announcement about what's going to be happening with the Louisville Police Department.
Today, the Justice Department is opening a civil investigation into the Louisville Jefferson County Metro Government and the Louisville Metro Police Department to determine whether LMPD engages in a pattern or practice of violations of the Constitution or federal law. Today's announcement is based on an extensive review of publicly available information about LMPD conducted by the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. The investigation will assess whether LMPD engages in a pattern or practice of using unreasonable force, including with respect to people involved in peaceful, expressive activities.
Sounds good, right? Well, under our previous Democratic president, we had a similar type of investigation happen with the Baltimore Police Department. But before we get into that, guys, and let me apologize in advance to my audience for this MSNBC clip that I'm about to subject you to. I am deeply sorry. You guys know how I feel about MSNBC and CNN. And the only reason I came across this clip was via social media on Twitter, but I saw it, and damn if it didn't make me laugh my ass off. This is Jason Johnson, MSNBC contributor, disliker of Black women like me. Remember, he called Brianna Joy Gray from the island of misfit Black girls. I too am from that same island. and so I kind of feel some way about Jason Johnson talking shit about leftist Black women. However, in typical Negro whisperer form, these are the kind of Negroes that they let on MSNBC. Check out what Jason Johnson had to say about this announcement from Joe Biden's Department of Justice regarding the LMPD. Tunde, can we look at B3?
Joe Biden is not going to just give lip service to these kinds of issues. It would have been very easy to sort of leave what happened in Louisville alone, but he has actually heard the concerns and the protests and the anger and the frustration of Americans of all colors, but especially African Americans, who he owes his job to, that these kinds of issues have to be addressed. So Merrick Garland coming out there and saying, we're going to Louisville, that puts the word out that every other police district across America may be in the crosshairs if they show a consistent pattern of abusing people.
I'm sorry. Every other police department might be in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice if they show a pattern of consistent, violating people's rights. Sir, please take a poll. This is every police department across the country. And I assure you, they are not afraid of Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, as proof positive by the fact that police departments who were out here conducting themselves very badly in terms of brutality and violence and murdering people and doing all kinds of shit, as detailed in Brandon's book, I Got a Monster. They didn't give a fuck when the Department of Justice came to Baltimore to investigate the Baltimore police, because the Baltimore police kept on Baltimore policing at the same level that they was before they were under federal consent decree. And Brandon, bear with me if you could for a moment, because I'm going to take us back in time just a little bit. Tunde, I want you to have, let's get that C1 queued up. Because Brandon, this is back from 2016 when then Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, oh boy, Mike Bloomberg's homegirl, when Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who was then the mayor, at the press conference announced or introduced Vanita Gupta from the Department of Justice, who Jason Johnson actually referred to in the clip a part of the clip that we didn't see, because what Jason Johnson said at the beginning of his thing was, oh, Vanita Gupta's about to get at him. I'm like, oh, really? Is she now? So y'all, let's go back to 2016, because as everybody knows, 2015 is when Freddie Gray was murdered by Baltimore police. There was an attempt, I suppose, at prosecuting the officers involved, but nobody was held accountable. But the Baltimore Police Department came under federal investigation by the Obama administration's Department of Justice. And this press conference clip that we're about to see was of the announcement of what the DOJ's findings were as a result of that year-plus long investigation. Tunde, can we look at C1, please?
I want to welcome Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney Vanita Gupta and thank the Justice Department's recognition for our reform efforts. I also want to acknowledge Police Commissioner Kevin Davis, Baltimore City Council President Jack Young as well. Today marks an important step on our path to reform. With the release of its finding report, the Justice Department is sharing with the community, with the city government, and with our police department the conclusions of its 14-month-long investigation. The report identifies specific problems in the department, but the transparency of the report offers a crucial foundation if we are going to move forward. Because I believe transparency is the only true foundation upon which we can rebuild community trust.
We conclude that there is reasonable cause to believe that BPD engages in a pattern or practice of conduct that violates the Constitution and federal anti-discrimination law. BPD engages in a pattern or practice of making unconstitutional stops, searches, and arrests, using enforcement strategies that produce severe and unjustified disparities in the rates of stops, searches, and arrests of African Americans, using excessive force, and retaliating against people engaging in constitutionally protected expression. These violations have deeply eroded the mutual trust between BPD and the community it serves, trust that is essential to effective policing as well as to officer and public safety. The problems in Baltimore didn't happen overnight or appear in a day. The pattern or practice that we found results from long-standing systemic deficiencies in the BPD. The agencies failed to provide officers with sufficient policy guidance and training to collect and analyze data of officer activities and to hold officers accountable for misconduct.
Now, Brandon, the reason that I wanted us to take this little peek back into time is because, hindsight is 2020, is it not? And when we look back at that press conference from 2016 and can take assessment of how Baltimore police have adjusted or not adjusted since being investigated federally, you have been following Baltimore Police Department for years now and their practices. Your whole book is about how Baltimore police ain't shit. I got a monster. So tell us, Brandon, what happened with the Baltimore police once the feds got involved? And even go back, tell us what was happening with Baltimore police while Obama's Department of Justice was investigating them, and what has happened in the years since.
Yeah, so that's a good place to start. I mean, one thing to really stress is that following the death of Freddie Gray, there was a civil rights investigation in the Baltimore Police Department, similar to what's going to happen in with Louisville. So from 2015 to 2016, about a year, the DOJ was here investigating the department. They found these heinous patterns and practices of unconstitutionality and harassment and illegal detainments and all of these things. What this DOJ investigation did not discover was the criminal conspiracy that was operating within the police department, which is what my book is about. So the report has no whiff or indication of cops dealing drugs, stealing money, planning evidence, all these terrible things, in part because it's just outside the scope of what the DOJ is even kind of conceptualized as policing. So I can say that, like, on August, I think it was the 8th of 2016, when that DOJ announcement happened that we just watched, I mean, the cops that are in my book were driving around, violating people's rights. Within a few weeks of this, they caused a crash, didn't help the people because they knew it would get them caught in a chase. They planted evidence, according to the Court of Appeals here, days after this DOJ investigation was announced. So there's this central thing that, like, when we talk about reform, like the department here, like what was discovered by the Department of Justice was only a small percentage of what was actually happening. I just think they're ill-equipped to do it. So that's really important to stress. And then since then, there's the police scandal. There's other problems of Baltimore police. They continue to get more money each year. Homicides continue to be at a staggering 300 plus rate. So it's not working. We're caught in a consent decree, which is sort of this liberal fetishization of reform to its like extreme. And yet now what we're encountering is a growing movement in Baltimore to defund the police. And in fact, the consent decree decrees that you have to give the police more money. So now an actual solution that's coming from a lot of people in the city can't be done under the consent decree. In fact, there's been question about whether the city has buyer's remorse for that consent decree. So, and then I think on a larger level, I don't want to be a nihilist here. Like, it's good to be investigating police departments and it's good to put out these reports, but it's clear that this is seen as sort of the end, or that's only within the scope of what the DOJ or anyone's willing to do. And that's really frustrating because I can show how it didn't work here, and also how officers sabotage those reforms in all these different ways. They wouldn't wear their body cameras. They'd manipulate their body camera footage. They do, all these things that are really typical. So you can't really, the reform is sort of needs to be the beginning. And when you see these kind of announcements, it's sort of seen as like everything's going to be fixed. Because, and this was reflected in my story for the appeal about the gun unit. Alex Vitale, who wrote the great book End of Policing, kind of says this to me in the story. Because what the DC police have been doing is categorizing all their stop and frisks and then in theory releasing the information. So sort of presented as this beautiful, great data fix. Hey, look, we're going to categorize the race, the duration, whether it resulted in arrest, all these things really show you what stop and frisk is like. And then the city doesn't release it until the ACLU of DC sued them. I bring that up because you don't need another patterns and practice investigation to know that policing is racist. It's policing is the problem, not this particular police department. And that's kind of the game here. Again, I really want to stress, like, I don't want to say we shouldn't be doing these things, but it's the same as when Biden or other Democrats especially kind of announced, we're going to have a task force, we're going to put some people together, we're going to look at this over the next year. It's a game. It's a way of delaying the inevitable as long as possible. And Baltimore is kind of just a stunning example of that, because you had the DOJ here investigating us, and the DOJ somehow missed a massive criminal conspiracy. And in fact, in my book, one of the co-conspirators, who was a cocaine dealer that was working with these cops, was going into the police headquarters and taking evidence and planning robberies while the DOJ was here. And why was he able to do that? Because the DOJ didn't have any interaction in the police headquarters with the police for obvious reasons. So he was able to lie and say he was a Fed to continue to do more, to steal drugs and deal drugs and collaborate with dirty cops. So to me, that's just such an incredible example of like the limits of reform and the kind of game of reform. Again, I don't want to say we shouldn't investigate departments that are high profile for their misconduct, but there's something going on with these where we try to present that as like, that's the ceiling. That's all that can happen. And it should really be like the baseline of where we start to look at policing. And instead it's sort of seen as like, hey, we crunched some data. Here's a report. Turns out they're racist, just like we thought. And then in a few years, it's all, and then what comes out of this reform? More training. They need body cameras. They need better laptops. They need better gear. And so it ultimately becomes a way of enriching the police as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea of police reform it's a liberal fairy tale or a political fairy tale. Like I said, it reminds me in terms of phraseology of trickle down economics. It doesn't mean shit, right? Like in true application in outcomes, like, are we looking at, does trickle down economics actually work? No. Does police reform actually work? No. And I think I agree with you, Brandon, about, we should continue these investigations, but even like we're seeing with Baltimore police, who are still very much engaged in the same patterns and practices of misconduct and violating people's rights that they were when they killed Freddie Gray. It's like, okay, cool. Well, the Department of Justice took 14 months out of their time to compile a report about which everybody was already familiar with how Baltimore police was getting down. But at the end of the day, like, have they improved? Are there consequences? Is there accountability? I mean, we know the members of the gun trace task force were prosecuted, but they were out here wilding the fuck out. Like, I mean, they were out here not being subtle about it. So I don't know. Let me get your take on that. I mean, did the fact that the gun trace task force got prosecuted federally, I mean, was that a good outcome of the consent decree, or did that actually have nothing to do with the consent decree at all?
It had absolutely nothing to do with the consent decree. That's what's so striking here, is you have a DOJ civil rights investigation that doesn't somehow stumble upon a bunch of drug dealing, evidence planning cops. What really happened, which I think really speaks, kind of ties us all together, is the reason these cops were exposed and were federally indicted is because the feds were investigating a black heroin dealing group in East Baltimore that were mostly dealing to white people in the county. Some of the heroin they dealt led to an overdose. They were investigating the overdose with the plan to charge the dealer who sold the heroin with murder because of the overdose. Just like a completely insane thing that's really happening more and more. In the investigation, this drug dealing crew, they came across a phone call where it was cops talking to drug dealers, and they sort of felt like they needed to investigate it. But the DOJ and the feds fell into this police scandal. It was outside of their civil rights investigation. So I think it's really important to think about. And then, I mean, I think the way they're similar too is, I was really struck by seeing Chauvin be found guilty and walking away in handcuffs and seeing his face as the verdict was read. That's powerful. And it really reminded me of being in the courtroom when some of the officers in my book were found guilty. It's like striking to see, right? It's amazing to see a cop's like face get really red because he's facing consequences for his actions for the first time in his life. But in the same way that I was really appreciated the sort of outside of the sort of pundit class of MSNBC types and other New York Times liberals, you did have a much more profound sense this time that, like, look, it's better that this was a guilty verdict than a not guilty verdict, but it's really not that big of a deal. We need to really focus on keep our eye on the ball. And that's sort of what happened in Baltimore too. And the game was similar too, lastly, because what happened with Chauvin was police officers testified against him. They sort of said he was outside the realm of what policing is supposed to be. So they're able to protect the institution of policing by sort of sacrificing this one garbage cop. In Baltimore, the gun trace task force scandal roped in so far about 15 or 16 cops, but a dozen more at least were named during the trials involved. There's still this kind of Fourth Amendment violating going on. There's still shady police shootings, things like that. And so the gun trace task force, which again, I should say maybe my book and focusing so closely on them contributes to this idea. But the idea is they sort of isolated this group of cops and say they're the bad ones who've gotten rid of it. It kind of reflects what happened with Chauvin. And so I think we just really need to be suspicious, not only in the way that I think as if one is an abolitionist, you shouldn't be super excited about people going to jail at all. But we also know that it's sort of a distraction or a sleight of hand trick. And so you have this sort of dual tricks going on, this reform talk about patterns of practice investigation, and then, hey, we got these one cops, so it's sort of fixed. And then what is maintained here is the institution of policing, because that's really what, whether it's Biden or Trump's DOJ, is what they don't want to investigate, is like, what's the true nature and even perhaps point of American policing. They don't want to reckon with that. Supporting police even when they kill people and commit other crimes is very much a bipartisan issue in this country. And the reform efforts kind of allow that to be maintained, I think.
Absolutely.
And then you also just vilify these people, like George Floyd was presented as allegedly being on drugs and all these things, in my gun unit story. I mean, the bottom line is the mayor will say, well, that guy had a gun, so I don't care about his rights, basically. And it can't work like this. It does, but it really can't. It's unstable and it needs to change. And I hope some of these ideas kind of help people realize that.
So I'm so glad that you brought up the conviction of Derek Chauvin and how, he is a bit of a sacrificial lamb in order to support and still uphold and defend the institution of American policing as it is, shitty as it may be. Tunde, do me a favor. So the reason I say that is because if Derek Chauvin had been held accountable for his violence and his continued misconduct against the public, people who live in Minneapolis, George Floyd might still be alive. If Derek Chauvin had been held accountable for his previous egregious illegal actions, in which he was protected by being white male and a police, George Floyd might still be here. And I said that to say, Tunde, I want us to look at that clip that we just looked at, the C1. Is that right? No, I'm sorry. Yes, C1. And I just want us to really just to play the first 20 or so seconds where we see then Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake introduce the people behind her. So just play that little intro part, because there's a Bama standing behind her named Kevin Davis. And we about to talk about Kevin Davis and why Kevin Davis is still out here working as police, despite his very long record of brutality, of ignoring misconduct by his own officers while he worked as commissioner of Baltimore police and other jurisdictions as well. So Tunde, run that for me real quick.
I want to welcome Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney Vanita Gupta and thank the Justice Department's recognition for our reform efforts. I also want to acknowledge Police Commissioner Kevin Davis, Baltimore City Council President Jack Young, as well. All right. Today marks
I just wanted to make sure that y'all saw Kevin Davis's face up in the place. Y'all saw him standing right there on stage as Police Commissioner of Baltimore City Police at the time, along with sitting there with Stephanie Rawlings Blake, the mayor, and standing there with DOJ's Vanita Gupta. Now, let me tell you about Kevin Davis, and Brandon's going to tell us about Kevin Davis too. But Kevin Davis got fired from his position as the Commissioner of Baltimore Police, and Kevin Davis just got him a new job. And the package that we're about to see was done by NBC Washington's Prince George's County Bureau Chief Tracy Wilkins. I'm a big fan of Tracy Wilkins over here. I dig her reporting. Tracy did a piece this week about Kevin Davis being hired as the chief of police for Fairfax County, Virginia, which is in Northern Virginia. It is very much in the DMV. So Kevin Davis is managing to keep himself employed within this region. And apparently the people who are doing the hiring are just overlooking how shitty of a record he has as police. But his track record as being shitty police goes back decades. And yet he keeps getting hired and promoted, and being able to oversee other police departments. So Tunde, if we could please check out C2. Guys, this is a package from NBC Washington. Let me attribute Tracy Wilkins very loudly and clearly. And please pay attention, because this motherfucker is the chief of police somewhere else. Okay? It's fucking crazy. C2, my brother Tunde.
Former Baltimore Police Commissioner Kevin Davis will soon be the new chief for the Fairfax County Police Department. Davis began his career with Prince George's County Police and rose to assistant chief of that department despite a record of use of force cases. In a story you'll see only on News 4, Prince George's Bureau Chief Tracy Wilkins explains why one county resident says he can't forget his encounter with Davis. A warning, we want to advise you that some of the images in this report are disturbing.
At 52, Mark Spann still can't forget what happened nearly 30 years ago, the summer before he headed to law school, when he was stopped by then Prince George's County police officer Kevin Davis in front of his family's Temple Hills home.
At that point in my life, I was under the ideology that all police are here to help to serve the community.
And this is where the incident occurred, when he had me on the ground.
News 4 covered Spann in 1993 with the blood from his injuries dried on his face. He explained that Davis violently took him to the ground, arresting him.
And at that point, Davis says, give me your hands, and lodges me to the ground, throws me to the ground, and proceeds to mash my face to the pavement.
It was never clear why he was stopped, but he was charged with battery, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct.
I think it's out and out racism. The first question he asked was, upon me stopping, was not, what have you done, where have you coming from, how did you get that car?
Mark remembers the ride to the hospital in the front seat of Davis's police car. He would later describe those moments in court.
I have, to this date, never experienced such racial slants, slurs, and epitaphs, and the denigration. I remember at one point he had placed his baton next to in the seat, and he began putting on black leather gloves, and these were all intimidations, tactics.
Spann won a civil suit against Davis. Davis rose in the ranks. 6 years after Mark's case, Davis, then a sergeant, was sued for false imprisonment and arrest of a young man who claimed Davis and other officers essentially kidnapped him for a night. The victim won his civil suit. Davis went on to become assistant chief of the department before leading Anne Arundel County and Baltimore City's police departments.
I'm incredulous that this person could rise in the ranks of helping to serve a community. Any community.
Kevin Davis released a statement to News 4 saying, "I'm proud of my long career in law enforcement that includes leadership roles as assistant chief, chief, and commissioner in 3 large jurisdictions. A career that includes a history of reform accomplishments, a demonstrated commitment to diversity, crisis intervention, use of force de-escalation, body camera implementation, and police discipline transparency. I look forward to leading Fairfax County into a bright future of world-class constitutional policing." Davis did not respond to my request for a sit-down interview with him and Spann. Spann says he can't forget what happened that night.
You're never going to forget, but you are compelled to move forward.
Mark says that when Davis was up for the job in Baltimore City, he was contacted by an internal auditor for Baltimore who had questions about his incident. He says that this time around, he has not heard from Fairfax County. For News 4, I'm Tracy Wilkins.
Jeff McKay, the chair of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, told News 4 last week that he is excited for Davis to start, and he says he thinks that he has a good reputation across the region. Davis officially begins as Fairfax County Police Chief on May 3rd.
Brandon Soderberg, let me get your reaction, because Kevin Davis has a good reputation throughout the region. I guess if you were not giving a shit what Black or brown people have to say about the situation, sure. I guess Kevin Davis does have a good reputation. Let me get your reaction to that package that we just saw from Tracy Wilkins and NBC News 4.
I mean, that's a stunning piece of reporting, first of all. And I have to admit that I was aware of the thing they mentioned briefly, which is a illegal detainment or essentially kidnapping that Davis was involved in a few years later. In fact, it was a guy who was dating another officer. So they kind of picked him up and harassed him for dating this officer's daughter. I'm sorry, not dating the officer. This whole thing which involved some brutality. I didn't know about this case at all. So I'm learning about this moments ago. It's shocking. I'm kind of surprised both that it wasn't covered in Baltimore when Davis came here. And what's also the big, but at the same time, the big glaring omission of that is like, oh, well, he was the head of the Baltimore Police Department during this massive gun trace task force scandal. That's sort of ignored. So you have this officer who in 93 is attacking people and using racial epithets. A few years later is involved in a kidnapping. And then a decade or so after that, or a little more than a decade after that, is running a department that is involved in one of the most extreme police scandals of all time. I mean, it's just like, it's stunning. And now he's going to go on. I'd also say that Chief Newsham, formerly the DC police commissioner, who really oversaw the gun recovery unit and is really challenged in my story for the appeal by my source. Newsham is the chief of the Prince William County department in Virginia. So these sort of shady cops going to slightly smaller departments is kind of a trend. And yeah, I mean, to see this starting with Davis in 93 is just, I mean, it's a really good example of why any version of accountability just doesn't exist for police. And in fact, it parallels reform in general, because what someone like Davis can do, and he did this a little in Baltimore when he's asked about the illegal detainment, was he sort of presents his past misdeeds or malfeasance as like learning opportunities, which is like a really great and privileged place to be able to frame the time you beat the crap out of someone as a learning opportunity while this other person is haunted by it. So that's sort of another game of reform. Like the previous screw ups, the previous misconduct is then actually an opportunity to say, look how much I've changed, rather than saying, look, I'm clearly incompetent and shouldn't have this job. I'm doing racialized and racially disproportionate policing. Instead, it's kind of used to be like, well, I learned a lot from that and now I can do better. It's crazy. Sorry, I could rant about this a lot. It's just shocking. And like, I'm glad that that's at least being exposed a little bit there.
Well, it's infuriating because, you know, Brandon, what you know and what I know and what everybody watching the show knows is that really the exposure, I mean, it's meaningful, but is it going to result in him losing his position with Fairfax County? Are the people at Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, whoever's doing the hiring, you know, going to look at that package and be like, you know what, maybe this is not the guy for us, or even look at his tenure as Baltimore City police commissioner and be like, you know, I mean, like these things don't matter to the people in charge, because what they know is at the end of the day, Kevin Davis is going to direct his officers to fuck with black and brown people to make sure that it's the statistics driven policing, and you know, whether or not police are actually conducting themselves in a manner befitting an officer of the law, whatever the fuck that means, but just hoping that the assholes would just obey the law and not violate people's rights. I mean, that's the bare minimum of a standard, and the police know that they can't even meet that bare minimum standard, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's also just like the amount of time we use people's past criminal records to disparage them, and yet the same is never applied to police. In fact, it's really hard to get these records. I mean, the idea that like something like this isn't as readily available as it should about this 1993 incident says something. And so we use the records of regular people, working people forced into the underground economy against them all the time for even the most, to get even housing, you know, to rent somewhere. And yet someone like Kevin Davis is seen as a mistake from 1993 and a mistake from 1999 and a mistake from 2015 and 2018. It's all kind of ignored. It's frustrating.
It is frustrating. But Brandon, I am so appreciative that you came on the show today to talk about your piece with theappeal.org. It's titled, Let Me See Your Waistband. Brandon Soderberg, you guys, co-author of the book titled, I Got a Monster. And listen, guys, if true crime is your kink and shady and shifty police out here fucking up the community is your kink, this is, I mean, it's better than fiction because it's all true. I Got a Monster, y'all. The Rise and Fall of America's Most Corrupt Police Squad. It is out now. Please, if you're going to buy it from an independent bookseller if you could, but it's on Amazon too. Brandon Soderberg, along with Baynard Woods, there writing that very, 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 very graphic piece of true journalistic reporting there. So Brandon, thank you so much for your work in general. And also thank you so much for making some time and coming on and explaining a lot of the shit that we know it's happening, but it takes people like you to get into the weeds and get into the details and make it a story for us. So we certainly appreciate all the work that you do doing that.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. I'm love to yell about the police for a little bit with you. Thanks.
Right. That's what I told Brandon. I said, hey, you're going to come on and we're going to talk about your piece, but we're also going to take time to shit on Kevin Davis. So it's going to be a good time had by all. So you guys follow Brandon. I think Genevieve dropped Brandon's Twitter information. He is at No Trivia on Twitter, and you can go to theappeal.org and search his name and you will find all kinds of pieces about policing that Brandon has written over the years, because again, he is true to this. He is not new to this. Brandon Soderberg, y'all. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thanks.
Awesome. Guys, first of all, I want to thank everybody who was dropping us some coin. Nick, you rock. Who else rocks? My man, Derek Fuller. Derek Fuller, you rock. Who else rocks? RW, thank you so much. And Northern Witch, my darling, thank you so much, Northern Witch. I saw you in the comments trying to take down a troll of 200. Thank you so much. RW said, specific solutions, please. And dear RW, we have two solutions for police on Burn Down with Kim Brown. First solution is defund the police. Second solution is abolish the police. The police are proving to us, they are going out of their way to show us that they cannot justify, number one, the amount of public funds that they suck up. Number two, the tremendous risk they pose to public safety just by the manner of how they conduct themselves. The state of American policing requires them to be violent, right? It almost requires them to fuck people up and shoot people and beat people. So there's not a reform plan in place that addresses that. If the police keep getting more funding to be themselves, they have no incentive to change, right? But if they get less funding, you know what I mean? And if they are held to account, if they are prosecuted for violating the law, for violating people's civil and constitutional rights, then, you know, perhaps a conversation can be had. But how it stands right now, especially what we're seeing happening in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, with the young man who police shot, I'm hearing 5 times now, at least once in the back of the head, and the police, sheriff's deputies are playing funny, real funny style with releasing the body cam footage. The family has said that they only showed them 20 seconds of one deputy's camera when there were several deputies present. At least more than one deputy is thought to have fired a shot that had killed this young man. You can't reform that, y'all. That is beyond reformation. And I know to people outside of our sphere, our political sphere, defunding the police sounds crazy and abolishing the police sounds crazy. Well, who are you going to call if somebody break in your house? Well, let me tell y'all something. Y'all know who I called when I thought somebody was breaking in my house? I called PG County Police. Do you know what PG County Police did? PG County Police came to my house and pointed guns at me. Threatened to shoot my dog. So guess who will never call the police? Miwa. Guess who believes in their Second Amendment constitutional rights? Miwa. So the police don't have a function as far as I'm concerned from my personal perspective. So you all have to adjust with that how you will. But I encourage Black and brown people to please do not call the cops, y'all. Don't call the cops. If you can help it at all, please don't call the cops, because chances are they're going to come and think that you are the criminal or think that you are the problem. That poor young girl in Ohio, Ma'Khia Bryant, she called the police and they came to her house and shot her. You understand? I have no hope of reformation of a system like that. That shit doesn't exist. So anywho, RW, your contribution is so appreciated. And the answer is defund the motherfucking police and abolish them bitches. We got to reallocate our funds into other forms of public safety. You know what I'm saying? If we help to improve people's material conditions, chances are the crimes that people are being stopped and frisked and accosted for might go away. They might just evaporate. Why? Because if people have opportunities, maybe they won't need to be out here doing X, Y, and Z. Or, as Brandon said, the police need to decriminalize certain aspects of their jobs, including decriminalizing gun possession. And as we are seeing, the decriminalization of marijuana and other drugs is forcing police to start or continue to fuck with people with air fresheners hanging from their mirrors. Man, make it make sense. Make it make sense. Anyway, guys, that is our show. Who says something about call a black man you trust? Listen. Don't you call them police to your house. Don't call them, y'all. Exercise your Second Amendment rights, Black people. Don't let the cops and the racists be the only ones out here with guns. Does that make any sense? That makes no sense whatsoever. Black women, that goes double for you. Latinx women, that goes double for you. Our Asian and Persian and Arab sisters, that goes double for you. You better be a woman out here carrying some weaponry, or at least have the option to have some weaponry in your house, man. Make it an even playing field as best you can. Don't simply rely on the police to be your safety, because again, they could show up at your house and shoot you. So there's that, guys. Before I get off of here, so I saw some people in the comments talking about the remix morning show with Black Power Media. I was supposed to be on the morning show this morning. I woke up. I got up early. the morning show starts at 8. I got up early, y'all. I got up early. And because it was that super pink moon outside. So what I do on full moons, I try to take Epsom salt baths. I'm trying to cleanse my aura. Yes, I am one of them niggas, okay? I'm a cleansing my aura kind of nigga. So I got in the tub, in the salt water tub. Water was blazing hot. Anyway, I got out the tub. I was lightheaded. I was seeing lights. I threw up. I mean, I was in bad shape. And I don't know if this has to do with the fact that I got the coronavirus vaccine on Sunday. And I know some of y'all anti-vaxxers is like, yep, Kim, you shouldn't have got that goddamn vaccine. That's what the hell made you sick. I don't know what made me sick. But my point is, I was too ill this morning to join the remix morning show for Black Power Media. That is something I'm going to make sure will not happen tomorrow. So I'm about to holler at Jared. I'm gonna holler at Jared and them, see if they got a spot for me on Wednesday or maybe even Friday. So I will be on there for sure, because shout out to Kalanji, shout out to Jackie Lukman, shout out to Kamal, shout out to Dr. CBS, shout out to all the Black Power Media All-Stars. We love y'all. I'm looking forward to working with y'all. And thank you all for everybody who supports all the channels, apparently, because y'all are the shit. So that's our show, guys. We will see you back here on Friday for another edition of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. I want to thank you all so much for your amazing support. Don't forget, guys, if you have not already subscribed to the channel, I need you to go ahead and subscribe. Molly set all these amazing goals for us, and at the beginning of the month we were like, Molly, ain't no way we are gonna make them goals. And then some shithead on the Fox News decided to put us on the Summer Jam screen. I said, okay, well, we got us some new subscribers, and we got us some new patrons. That's awesome. And some new followers on some of our other social media platforms. So if you have not already subscribed, kindly do so. That would actually mean a heck of a whole lot to your homie. In other words, guys, I love y'all. Y'all are the shit. Thank y'all for everything. Thank y'all for y'all support. I see all our people up in here. I love y'all. Who else is up in here? Guy Shaw is up in here. Natalie's up in here. Who else is up in here? Everybody. Jean is up in here. Everybody is up in here. I fucks with y'all. Tasia, thank you so much, darling, for your support. John Coister. Yes. What's up, bro? I ain't seen your ass in this room in a minute. Who is that? River Run. $20. That's a dub, honey. Thank you for being you. That's so kind. Y'all are so nice. Y'all are so nice, man. Y'all are just amazing. Anyway, thank you all. Hey, shout out to all my relatives down in Virginia who apparently are watchers of my show. What's up, Uncle Ruffin? What's up, Ann? I appreciate y'all tuning in. And they say I cuss too much. I said, well, I grew up around y'all. What y'all mean? But what's up, Paige? Thank you, Paige, darling. Thank you so much. Y'all just drop. Should I sign off because y'all keep running me coin? I mean, what am I to do? Should we just keep talking? No. I'm gonna log off. You guys are amazing. Thank you all so much for your love and for your support. And we will see you back here Friday. Be looking out for me on the Black Power Media Remix morning show. One day this week, I will tweet it out. Okay. But what'd you say? The break. Oh, right. Y'all. Okay. Next week, we're taking a break. We're actually going to take a little vacation. Now, I don't know if anybody else is going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, but we just going to have the week off because honestly, like we have been doing this nonstop pretty much since I want to say December, right? Well, I have been doing it nonstop since October. Actually, even before then, with Stir Crazy. But so next week we are going to be off. Now, whether or not we have new content to give y'all is still yet to be determined, but we are going to do our damnedest to get some new shit up for y'all, even if we're not going to be live. But that means I get to get into chat and mix it up with y'all next week. So that's next week. But anyway, Friday, we live, we right here, and we hope to see you back here for Burn It Down with Kim Brown. You guys are amazing. Thank y'all for everything. See y'all later. Bye-bye.